The frozen catalyst. The world, seen through the eyes of thermodynamics, is a long fight against entropy. A quiet law that says order always decays, that heat always scatters, unless something works to hold it together. For 3 years, I had lived by that exact law without ever naming it. Ever since the accident that took my wife, Clara, in a blinding whiteout on Highway 61, I had reduced my life to a set of predictable variables, each one solved and set safely aside. I was Ethan Vance, a senior chemical engineer at the refinery north of town, a man whose mind had been trained in the precise math of heat and flow. But beneath that steady professional surface, I was entirely still, a system at rest, refusing anything that might disturb its fragile balance. My world had shrunk to the space between two fixed points. The tall, steam-belching chimneys of the refinery where I spent my days, and the quiet log cabin at the edge of the pines where I raised my 2-year-old daughter, Lily, alone. Lily was our miracle, adopted through a long legal process that had closed only weeks before Clara's death. She wore her mother's golden curls like a small crown, but her eyes, a bright, crystalline blue, nothing like Clara's warm brown, were a small, constant ache I never quite learned how to carry. I kept her close, shielding her from the world the same way. I double-checked a pressure gauge before startup, afraid some other storm might reach in and take her too. Then came the morning the deep freeze broke the town's hydroponic greenhouse. The call came at dawn, urgent and short. A rupture in the main heating pipes, the joints giving way under a week of brutal cold. They needed the county's best thermal engineer, and there was no one else to call. With no sitter available, I bundled Lily into her heaviest coat, her small cheeks already flushing pink in the cold, and drove us both through snow-choked pine roads toward the greenhouse, my hands tied on the wheel the whole way. Inside, the air was thick with steam and freezing mist, the visibility down to a few feet. Through the haze, draping blankets in a frantic rush over rows of dying tropical plants, was a woman I had never once seen in town. She stood out sharply against our gray, industrial winter. Her hair was a deep, vivid red, falling loose from a knot tied in haste, and her face, when she turned toward the door, carried the plain, unguarded worry of someone watching something she loved slowly die. For one long second, before either of us spoke, we simply looked at each other across the ruined greenhouse. Two strangers thrown together by an emergency, each quietly sizing up the other. "You're the engineer," she said, not quite a question. Her voice was warm and low, and it cut cleanly through the cold. It sounded steadier than her posture suggested she felt. "Ethan Vance," I said, and then found I had nothing else ready to say. I was a man far more comfortable with flow diagrams than with the small, ordinary business of meeting someone new, and I felt that gap now, standing in the slush with a toddler on my hip and a stranger's green eyes waiting on mine. "Maeve," she said, and reached out a gloved hand before remembering, all at once, that both of mine were full. A quick, embarrassed laugh slipped out of her, gone almost as soon as it arrived, and she pulled her hand back with an apologetic tilt of her head. "Sorry. I always forget when people show up with their arms full." "Happens more than you'd think," I said, and felt, with some quiet surprise, the corner of my own mouth attempt something like a smile. It felt like a muscle relearning emotion it hadn't used in years. An awkward little silence settled between us, the kind that only exists in the first minute of meeting someone, before either person knows where to look. She glanced at Lily, then away again, as if unsure whether admiring another man's daughter this quickly was allowed. Neither of us spoke for a beat too long, and then we both started a sentence at once, stumbled over each other's words, and stopped, laughing despite ourselves. "The tropicals," she said, recovering first, her urgency returning as she waved a hand at the dying rows behind her. "They won't make it another hour if the root temperature drops below 50. I don't actually know what to do about the pipe. I just knew I couldn't stand here doing nothing. Let me look at the manifold," I said, glad, honestly, for a problem I understood far better than the one standing in front of me. I knelt and set Lily on a dry crate near a working space heater. "Would you mind watching her?" The pressure in these lines isn't stable. Of course, Maeve said, and something in her voice changed the moment I asked. The panic in it softening, almost instantly, into something steadier, as if a small, frightened child had given her nervous energy somewhere useful to go. I turned to the ruptured pipe, tracing the crack along its seam with the focused, automatic attention of a man retreating into what he knows best. But even as my hands worked the bypass valve, some small, stubborn part of my attention kept drifting back toward the crate. Instead of hovering the way I half expected, Maeve knelt slowly in front of Lily, all the frenzy gone from her movements now. She pulled off Lily's mittens one at a time, warming the toddler's small hands between her own palms with an easy, practiced gentleness that struck me, in that moment, as strange. Not wrong, just strange, the way a math problem feels strange when it balances too smoothly on the first try, before you've checked every step. "Hi there, little hummingbird," Maeve murmured, her voice dropping low, meant for no one else in the room. Her eyes, I noticed, had softened in the shifting light. Not the sharp green of the emergency lamps, but something deeper and warmer, the color of something settling rather than something alert. "You have the brightest eyes I've ever seen. Are you helping your daddy fix the winter?" Lily, who usually shied away from strangers, an instinct I'd spent 2 years quietly teaching her, did something that struck an odd chord in my carefully ordered mind. She reached out one small hand, pressed it against Maeve's cheek, and let out a soft, bubbling laugh I hadn't heard from her in longer than I could easily remember. My breath caught somewhere in my chest, a small, unexpected hitch I couldn't explain. I turned my focus back to the valve, my hands trembling slightly as I tightened the last fitting. "It's just a strange coincidence," I told myself, reaching for the language of my trade to explain what I didn't yet have words for anywhere else. One data point, nothing more. But when I looked back and saw how naturally the two of them fit together, Lily leaning trustingly into the curve of Maeve's arm, Maeve's chin dipping low as if pulled there by something she couldn't quite resist, I felt the first small crack form in the wall I had spent 3 years building. It unsettled me more than the broken pipe ever could, watching my daughter find, in a stranger of 4 minutes, an ease she rarely gave even to me. By the time the manifold held pressure again and the greenhouse's ragged breathing steadied, Maeve was humming something soft and wordless against the top of Lily's head, and I found, for once, that I didn't know what to do with my hands. Over the months that followed, Maeve became the clear catalyst in our small, closed world. In chemistry, a catalyst lowers the energy a reaction needs without ever being used up itself. It makes the unlikely thing quietly possible. I understood the mechanism long before I admitted to feeling its effects. She began showing up at our cabin under thin excuses, checking on the plants she'd given us after the greenhouse repair, or bringing over pots of venison stew to fight the endless cold. At first, I resisted, the way a man resists a problem he's already decided he doesn't want solved. I kept my arms crossed, my eyes anywhere but on her face. But Maeve had a deep, unhurried patience, the kind that doesn't force a reaction but simply waits for the right conditions. She never pushed at the door I kept half closed against her. Instead, she poured an entire, quiet warmth into Lily and let me watch it from whatever safe distance I needed. One evening, as a blizzard rattled the windows and the cabin creaked softly under the wind, Maeve sat cross-legged on the rug, teaching Lily how to stack wooden blocks into a wobbly tower. I sat at the kitchen island, pretending to review refinery schematics, the pages untouched under my still pen. "Look, sweet girl," Maeve whispered, her voice full of a tenderness that tightened something in my chest I couldn't quite name. She guided Lily's small hand carefully toward the final block. "Steady now, look what you made. You are so clever." Lily clapped her hands, her whole face lit up. "Tower," she said, the word clearer than any I'd heard her say before. Then she looked up at Maeve, yawned, and leaned her whole small body sideways into the curve of Maeve's shoulder. Maeve closed her eyes at the touch, her chest rising in one long, contented breath, and wrapped her arms gently around the toddler, tucking Lily's head under her chin. She rocked her slowly, humming a melody so soft it barely stirred the air. "I've got you, my precious girl," she murmured into Lily's curls, her hands moving in slow circles across her back. "You are safe. You are so loved." A deep ache bloomed under my ribs. Not grief, exactly, but something closer to an old tenderness being asked to carry weight again. I set down my pen and crossed the room to kneel beside them. "She doesn't usually take to people like this," I admitted, my voice dropping into something more open than he usually allowed. My hand hovered over the floor before I finally let it rest near hers, not quite touching. "I've kept her so isolated these past couple years." I told myself I was protecting her. Maeve turned her head, her green eyes holding mine steadily, without flinching. "You were surviving, Ethan," she said gently. "But people aren't like your machines. They can't grow sealed off in a vacuum. They need warmth from somewhere, or they go cold on the inside." In that moment, whatever careful distance I'd kept between us simply gave way, the way a wall falls not from one blow but from many small ones. I understood, all at once, that Maeve was the one variable I'd never accounted for. By the time the winter solstice festival arrived, the whole town lit with bonfires and lanterns reflecting gold off the snow, I knew I was completely in love with her. Standing near the edge of the woods, Lily asleep in her sled beside us, I took Maeve's gloved hands in mine. "Maeve," I said, my heart hammering, "my life was just a count of days before you walked into it. You've changed the whole balance of things. I don't want to just measure time anymore. I want to live inside it with you. I want you in our future, for good, if you'll have us." Her eyes filled instantly, a wide, bright smile breaking across her face. She pulled me close, her forehead against mine, her breath warm between us in the cold. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, her hands framing my face, her palms warm against the chill. "I fell for you the moment I saw the fiercely protective father hiding under all that armor. I'm not going anywhere." The balance broke less than a week later. I had driven into town to surprise Maeve at her apartment, carrying a small bouquet of winter flowers I'd grown in a corner of the refinery's test lab. Finding her door slightly open and hearing the shower running, I let myself in, calling her name once before setting the flowers down. That's when I saw a thick, worn folder on her desk. Stamped across the front was the logo of the Midwest Cradle Adoption Agency, the same agency Clara and I had used to adopt Lily 2 years and a lifetime ago. My analytical mind moved faster than my sense of privacy. I opened it, the pages, catching fragments. "My sweet girl, giving you away is tearing my soul apart. I hope Clara gives you the life I couldn't." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to lose all its air. Everything lined up into one devastating conclusion. Maeve wasn't the kind stranger fate had sent our way. She was Lily's birth mother, the woman I believed in that moment, who had given her away. The shower shut off. A moment later, Maeve walked into the living room, drying her hair, and when she saw the folder shaking in my hands, all the color drained from her face. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking, the towel slipping unnoticed to the floor. "You lied to me," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. I stood rigid, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles went white, my chest rising and falling in short, uneven pulls. "Every smile, every pot of stew, every time you touched my daughter, was it all just a way to get close to the child you gave away?" "No, Ethan, please, let me explain," she cried, stepping toward me, her hands reaching out as if trying to hold together a world that was already coming apart. Tears streaked her face, her features twisted in raw pain. "Explain what?" I said, my voice rising, 3 years of grief finally finding somewhere to go. "That you gave her away and then regretted it? You slipped into our lives like something I never saw coming. I'm her father, Maeve, mine and Clara's. You'll never see her again." I shut the folder hard and pushed past her into the hallway, my shoulder catching hers hard enough to make her stumble, and walked out into a night already howling with the season's worst blizzard. In my truck's mirror, I watched her stumble out onto the snow-covered porch in nothing but a thin sweater sinking to her knees, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs as the snow slowly began to cover her. A week of heavy, suffocating silence followed. I threw myself into work, pulling long shifts, trying to drown out the memory of Maeve's tear-streaked face under the roar of the refinery's turbines. But the numbers wouldn't add up. My mind kept circling back to her journal. The depth of the sorrow in her handwriting, the total absence of anything like malice. Then the phone rang. It was Arthur Pendleton, the longtime attorney for Clara's family. "Ethan," he said, his voice grave over the static-filled line. "I got a notice this morning from a safety deposit box. Clara left a letter for you. One she said should only be opened if you ever learn the truth about Lily's origins. I'm sending you a copy now." My heart hammering, I opened the file on my laptop. Clara's familiar handwriting filled the screen. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, it means Maeve has found her way into your life, where you found her files first. Please don't be angry. I hid the truth because I knew your careful, cautious mind would panic over the weight of it. Lily wasn't a normal adoption. When my illness got worse, and we learned I was infertile, Maeve, my dearest friend since childhood, offered us the one gift no one else could give. She agreed to be our surrogate. Because of the outdated surrogacy laws in our state, we had to process it through an adoption agency to make our rights official. But it was Maeve's egg, and it was your child. Lily is biologically yours, and she is biologically hers. Maeve didn't abandon her daughter. She gave up her rights so I could know motherhood before I died. She broke her own heart to build ours. I made her promise that if I passed, she'd find you both, so my two favorite people were never left alone in the cold. Please, Ethan, don't let pride ruin the family. She gave up everything to build." The laptop slipped from my hands and hit the desk with a hollow thud. I had gotten everything backward. I hadn't been protecting my daughter from a predator. I had been punishing the one woman who had given up her own child so that I could have a family at all. And in my blind pride, I had thrown her out into the cold with nothing but a slammed door. The blizzard outside had grown into the worst of the season. A blinding wall of white with almost no visibility. I drove like a man possessed toward Maeve's apartment, only to find it empty, a single suitcase missing from her closet. A transit schedule on the counter told me everything. She was taking the 4:30 train out of town, leaving Minnesota and us for good. I arrived with Lily strapped in the back seat, and leaving the truck running, scooped her into my arms and ran through the howling wind onto the frozen platform. The air was thick with fog and the hiss of the train's brakes. The massive locomotive was already pulling forward against the icy rails. "Maeve!" I shouted, my voice swallowed instantly by the wind. Then I saw her, standing near the last carriage, her red hair tucked under a dark cap, her face pale and hollow, utterly defeated. Tears had frozen into tiny crystals along her lashes. "Maeve!" She turned. When she saw me and saw Lily in my arms, her eyes widened with a mix of shock and old, familiar hurt. Her whole body pulled inward, bracing for another blow. I stopped caring about logic. I dropped to my knees right there on the ice, the cold burning through my trousers, and held Lily up toward her, my own tears freezing against my cheeks. I was wrong, I said, my voice breaking. "Maeve!" I read Clara's letter. "I know everything. I'm so sorry. So sorry for being too blind to see what was right in front of me. Please, don't leave us. I love you. We need you." Maeve froze. Her eyes moved from my face down to Lily and back again. The guarded, defensive posture she'd been holding melted away in a single breath. She let her suitcase fall into the snow and dropped down beside us, wrapping her arms around both of us, her whole body shaking with sobs. I buried my face against her neck, feeling the warmth of her skin against the freezing storm. "Ethan," she gasped between tears, gripping my jacket as though I were the only solid thing left to hold on to. "I wanted to tell you so many times. I didn't want to break the memory of Clara, and I didn't want you to think I was trying to take her place. I love you so much. I never wanted to leave." Then Lily shifted between us, reaching out both small hands to touch Maeve's wet cheeks, her clear blue eyes searching the green ones that had given her life. "Mama," she said. Soft, clear, right on time. Maeve gasped, a sound of pure joy breaking loose from somewhere deep in her chest, and pulled Lily close, burying her face in the toddler's neck. "Yes, baby, it's me. It's Mama," she wept, rocking her right there in the snow, kissing her forehead and small cold hands again and again. "My beautiful, sweet girl, I'm never letting you go again. Never." 3 months later, the northern thaw finally arrived. The sheets of white ice pulled back, giving way to the rich, damp earth of a Minnesota spring. The refinery's smokestacks still puffed faithfully in the distance, but the air inside Maeve's greenhouse, the same one that had first brought us together, was warm, fragrant, and full of new growth. I stood near the entrance, leaning against the wooden frame, a cup of coffee warming my hands. My posture, for the first time in longer than I could easily measure, was completely at rest. A few yards away, Maeve knelt in the soil, teaching Lily how to plant marigold seedlings. Lily's hands were black with dirt, and she was laughing as Maeve tickled her nose with a dandelion. "There you go, my little sunshine," Maeve said, wiping a smudge of soil off Lily's nose with her thumb. "Press the dirt down gently. You're helping the flowers grow, just like you helped Mama's heart grow." Lily giggled and threw her arms around Maeve's neck. "Love you, Mama. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, baby," Maeve whispered back, kissing her cheek. Maeve looked up at me then, her red hair catching the morning light, her smile calm and full. I crossed the soil to kneel beside them, wrapping my arms around both of their waists, pressing a long kiss to Maeve's temple. As a chemical engineer, I had spent my whole career learning how things interact, how heat moves, how bonds are formed under pressure. But kneeling there, wrapped in the warmth of the family we had almost lost and fought so hard to save, I finally understood the one law no textbook had ever taught me. Some reactions can't be rushed. Some bonds need the hardest winters to form. But once that balance is finally reached, what's left is the strongest thing in the world, steady, warm, and unbreakable.